the next thing, I think, the key as investors should keep in mind, it's going to be the middle classes of China, but also of South Africa, of Brazil, of Indonesia, of all of these countries. I think, and I don't have all the statistics down, but you can see it when you travel, that we've reached a tipping point. That is, the middle classes have gotten to a big enough level, and I'm not talking about people walking into Gucci stores in Beijing. Those are the super wealthy, and there are plenty of those. I'm talking about people who are moving up the curve in terms of a first house or apartment, a first car, a bigger electronics, travel, all of this kind of stuff. All of the stuff that almost like when we were in the 1950s coming off World War II, the Chinese are doing now, and emerging market countries are in their own way doing that now too, the Brazilians and the Mexicans and so forth. And I think we've reached a point, this tipping point, where yes, there will be economic cycles. Well, there'll be an ebb and flow. There'll be more spending and then less spending depending on the economy. But we've reached a point we're not turning back. These middle classes are serious now, and they're going to continue to just grow and be dynamic. And that's where I think the real excitement in investments and in just in general in economic growth are going to be the best. And so I would focus on that if you're looking for a theme for the next 20 or 30 years. Now, it could blow up over the next year and stocks could come down in those sectors, but 20 or 30 years, I think this is the real exciting area. And now China, I'm just going down one path investment-wise. China has had a investment market maybe since the mid-1990s in the two markets, Shanghai and Shenzhen, and it's been restricted. Companies can't just list there willy-nilly. You have to have state approval to do it. So many of the companies listed on those exchanges are former state-owned companies that are now private. I say that in parentheses, and are publicly traded. This would be the state banks, the state telephone companies, the state coal companies, the railroad companies, this kind of thing, which are now privately owned. But the problem with these companies, a couple things, they were state-controlled companies. They were countries unto themselves for years. That is, if you were a state steel company, you employed literally 2 times the number of employees you actually needed. And you provided the school system, the housing, the legal system, everything. You were a company town for these employees. And then in the late 1990s, as these companies were losing money hand over fist, the government finally said, well, okay, we'll privatize you, and meaning list you on the stock exchange, and you can cut employees. And most of them have cut 30–40% of their employees over the last 10 or 15 years. You know, it's an interesting statistic. I haven't updated this, but believe it or not, this is true. Up until about 2003, or so, 2004, I don't know what the more recent statistics are. Up to 2004, if you look back 10 years, China had fewer manufacturing jobs in 2004 than they had in 1994. Fewer manufacturing jobs. You'd say, how can this be? You know, they're exporting to Walmart, to everybody. How could they not? Well, it's for 2 things. Number one, that these state companies were just trying to get rid of everybody they could because they were overstaffed. And second of all, China is no different than us. Even though labor is, in gross terms, inexpensive, it's still, China still has to make the trade-off that can't we do more with less? Can't we use capital spending and employ fewer people but produce more? China's going through the same thing as we are going through. And so it's interesting. Just because we're buying a lot from China doesn't mean their employment is soaring. Now, it may be that manufacturing employment is increasing now because the state companies have laid off everybody they need to lay off, but I need to find that out. But in any case, the Shanghai Shenzhen Exchange has these former state-owned companies. The problem with them is whose interest is really at heart in these companies, because if you're the president of the state-owned telephone company, you know that you are a good friend of the powers that be in Beijing, or you're a party member, or whatever. You're not there because you're a great manager. You're there because you have management skills, but you are part of the power elite. So your allegiance is going to be to the state and to the employees, not necessarily to the shareholders. So that's going to be a problem. A number of years ago, 5 years ago, I remember there used to be four phone companies in China, basically. 2 landlines, 2 cellular, or wireless. And suddenly, out of the blue, and these were all publicly traded on stock exchange, and 2 of them were traded in on the New York Stock Exchange. Suddenly, out comes the announcement that one company president would go over to this company, and this company's president would go over to this company. It's kind of like Verizon and AT&T just switching presidents. And, shareholders, there was no apparent vote or no discussion about it. Done. And everybody's mouth just dropped, what is this, But that's the way things work. And if you're going to be invested in those type of companies, then that's the lay of the land, and get used to it. So these companies are traded in Shanghai and Shenzhen, and if you want to participate in that, it's complicated. I won't go into all the details. The problem is, there are shares that are only available to Chinese, and shares only available to foreigners on these 2 exchanges. And if you're a foreigner like you and me, you can't just buy those shares. You have to get a license to buy it, which means you need to be a big hitter like Fidelity or something like that that's going to bring in millions of dollars to buy in those markets. So basically, the 2 Chinese exchanges are closed to retail outside of China. If you want in, you buy in through a mutual fund on the New York Stock Exchange. The one to probably, if you want that market, is the FXI, it's called. It's an exchange-traded fund that invests in the top 25 companies in China, all these former state-owned companies. So if you want to surf along with those markets, that the FXI is the one to buy. Now, doesn't sound so exciting so far, but there's an interesting market